Okay, at the end of Perek Daled, it's the top of page 373, looking at the numbers in the bottom. So, we explained yesterday is how the letters of Hashem's name, Yud Hey Vav Hey, indicate the 10 spheres, the 10 ways in which Hashem manifests, expresses himself so that he can relate to worlds. And the name of Hashem was divided into two, each concluding with a Hey. Hey being representative of expansion, Hey being representative of some idea or something being expanded and being settled in a certain space. The first was the inner worlds, the Yud and the Hey, representative of the intellectual system, which all remains within the person. So Yud and the Hey represent a level, amongst them in the hidden worlds, a place where they're so conscious of Hashem's truth that there's no room, or there's no space, there's no idea even of otherness. And then you have the Alma Gallion, the latter two letters of Hashem's name, the Vav Hey, which are representative of Vav drawing down energy, and then Hey being expanded into an outer area, and that was symbolized by communication, speech. The king rules through speech. Revelation, in which we have otherness, we have a world outside of purely divine truth, so to speak, or there's a place where, and then depends on how close and how far you are from Hashem, and that's what will determine to what degree you are surrendered, so to speak, to Hashem, or aware of Hashem. Now, you're going to get to how this Shem Havaya, this Yud Hey Vav Hey, is representative of man. And the reason it's representative of man is because the soul of man comes from Hashem, as we explained. Yeah, there should be more. As we explained way at the beginning of the chapter, the Jewish neshama, the soul, comes from the breath as opposed to speech. It's the say that it's the very, like, I live on my air, and that's what comes out when I blow. So what's invested in neshama is a part of Hashem himself, and therefore the neshama of a Jew has all of the four letters of Hashem's name in him, so that he can, by using the mediums of these 10 attributes, or these four representative letters, can connect to who he really is, being part of and one with Hashem. Now, the Rebbe explains all of these details very, every single detail of these words and descriptions. And I'm just going to kind of explain the general rule along with the Rebbe's explanation as we've done in the past here, and just a brief intro in order to fully understand that. The Rebbe notes there's a distinction between the way in which the four letters of Hashem's name are described when he describes it in the realm of Hashem, in the realm of Atzilus, the realm of Hashem's truth, Hashem's revelation, and there's a difference between the way that's written and the way it's written when we describe it in man. And the basic difference is that when you can see when it comes to Chachma quite clearly, that when it comes to the description of Hashem's spheres, the Alter Rebbe describes each level as a self-standing level. Whereas when he describes the four letters and the 10 spheres as they are in the Jewish neshama, he keeps on describing them as they are linked to the level that follow it. So he describes Chachma, we'll see it clearly, as the beginning of Bina. He describes the awareness as the beginning of the process of understanding. And then understanding as the beginning of the process of bringing it down to emotion. And then emotion as the process by which you come to an action. And the reason why he does that, explains the Rebbe, based on his father's interpretations here. And the reason he does that is because the ultimate purpose, the ultimate godly truth to all these 10 attributes as they are in man is when the person behaves the way Hashem wants in doing the Torah and mitzvahs. When you're talking about Hashem himself, so the awareness of Hashem, let's say the level of Chachma, where there's a state that's aware of God's truth, doesn't have to evolve anywhere for it to be validated. Okay? A state which is aware of Hashem's truth doesn't need to evolve into any understanding to be validated. It's a state of awareness of Hashem's truth. It is in and of itself a valid state of being. But awareness of Hashem for a human being, without or later evolving into understanding, and then a feeling, and then finally, primarily, into an action of serving Hashem, what is it? Our awareness of Hashem is always going to be insufficient. So the only way in which the letters of Hashem's name expressed in the neshama can fully be expressed and connected to Hashem in its true fashion is if it comes out in an action of Torah and mitzvahs. an action that Hashem wants us to do. And therefore, when he describes the Chachma, Bina, Das, the four letters as they are in the human being, he's going to describe them all as they lead to the next, which finally leads to a full-fledged service of Hashem in Torah mitzvahs, as we shall explain. So you'll see that difference as we go along.
When he describes the attributes of Hashem or Ramila, each one has an independent value.
Yeah.
Even though without the ultimate, there's an ultimate goal.
That's right. So essentially, if Hashem only created Chachma, there's a state that was aware of Him. It's not valid. It's a state of being. It's aware of Him. Finished. But a Jew can be aware of Hashem on some minuscule level, however capable you are of understanding. But what is it unless it's connected to essentially serving Hashem through Torah and mitzvahs? Now it's been really connected, as you'll see. So second to top line on page 373, if looking at the numbers on the bottom. So too literally by way of example. We explained this terminology in a previous class, and that when we say so too literally, what Alter Rebbe means is that it's by way of example because our Chachma and Hashem's Chachma cannot be compared. Our Bina and Hashem's Bina cannot be compared. Our wisdom, our understanding, our knowledge is nowhere to be compared to Hashem's wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So where is it Chacham Mamish? How is it exactly the same? In their comparison. Remember, we explained this in the previous class, we explained this, that whatever the distinction is between Chachma and Bina down here in our world, the same distinction exists up in the world of the divine, even if the actual things are different. Right? We gave the example. It's a perfect parallel, that's the right word. Yeah, so I think we used the example of the Haggadah, where it describes the hand of Hashem versus the finger of Hashem. The finger of Hashem in Egypt and the hand of Hashem at the sea. And the Haggadah says that if we're comparing it to a finger and a hand, then whatever happened at the sea has to be 5 times the size of what happened in Egypt, because a hand has 5 fingers. Now obviously it's not a finger nor a hand, but in their comparison, in their parallel, they're the same. So Chacham Mamish, so too likewise literally, in their comparison, Al Derech Mashma by way of example, because they're not exactly, they're not the same things obviously. And the Magdal Havdalas Len Kates, good morning. Magdalas Len Kates, with distinctions to no end. I mean, there's an endless gap between my wisdom and God's wisdom, but in comparing my wisdom to my understanding, we can compare that parallel. It's exactly the same parallel as Hashem's wisdom and Hashem's understanding. So, but Nishmas Adam, the same thing is true in the soul of man. She B'chinas Nefesh Elikis, which is the godly soul, which we explained at the beginning of chapter 5, or the middle of chapter 5, chapter 4, sorry, that it emerged from the inside. Hashem blew it out from His inside, so to speak. So it also has these 4 letters of Hashem's name, the 10 spheres. So the first is Seichel HaNelam, hidden intelligence, the awareness, the Chachma, Hamerumuz, which is alluded to by Ois Yud and letter Yud. So how does he describe it here? In Chachma, he described it before in the next words. When he described Hashem's Chachma, when he described Hashem's wisdom, he says, it's a dot which is hidden before it expands. And here he describes like this. What is Chachma? What is Chachma in the human experience? It's that it has the power to be manifest. Lahavin, to understand, ulahaskalan, to comprehend, in God's truth, and in God's greatness, each person according to his ability, and according to the ability of his understanding and his mind to expand on the idea. So he hasn't described Bina yet, but he already described Bina. Because the Bina is going to be the next one. That's the next Bina. But over here, he just describes Chachma. But what's Chachma? It's the fact that I have the capability of being able to understand Hashem. That's Chachma. Chachma is the level of awareness of Hashem. It's the same awareness described when we described the first, the spheres of Hashem. But here we're describing Chachma as the ability to be able to comprehend Hashem to the best of my ability. And then, level 2 of Bina itself, the understanding, and then when I do actually delve deep in my mind, and expand my knowledge, my understanding, to contemplate God's greatness. Then, when I actually do the expansion, so I have the awareness, which is the potential to expand, in elaborating on the awareness of Hashem. And then I actually, that's Chachma. And then I actually expand, then this Bina, this understanding, which I've expanded on this awareness, Merumezes is alluded to binasai. So merumezes binasai, my understanding, is alluded to by hey in the letter hey, which again, as we explained before, sheish lareichev, which has expansiveness. There's a bar on the top, v'gam oirech, and it also has a going down line, a length. Hamoyal hamshacha malamai lamata, which alludes to the drawing down from above to below, lahayil mi binasai, to give birth from. Again, he describes bina already in terms of it giving birth to the next level, which is emotions. Because as we said, understanding Hashem without leading to a feeling for Hashem and then to an action for Hashem is not really useful for anything. So the oirech, the length, the going down described in the letter hey, is after the expansion is done, after the words are given, after a person fully understands and develops the awareness he has of Hashem into a full-fledged understanding and comprehension. Then it can be drawn down to give birth, from his understanding, and his contemplation, begadlos Hashem, which he did in the greatness of God. What it gives birth to is Ava v'yira, love and fear, v'toldesein, and their offspring. So Ava v'yira, love and fear, are the two basic emotions, and they are coming close and moving back, either getting closer to something or going away from something. And all other emotions could be somehow either a tangle of these two or offshoot or breakaway or something like that. But it's basically Ava coming close to something and Yira retracting. And then these feelings also themselves have two stages. The first stage is the moichai v'ta'alum moislibai, in his mind and the hidden of his heart. That is to say, it's not a full-fledged emotion in which his heart's beating, but there's already the beginnings of an emotion. The beginnings of the emotion is, as explained in Chassidus, is in the mind and the hidden of the heart. I think the best way to understand this is, after a person understands the whole scenario, then the conclusion is it ought to be this way. Right? So let's say, I after understanding why something is so amazing, I say I ought to like it, and then I actually like it. What's the difference between saying I ought to like it versus I actually like it? The difference is, where is it? When I say I ought to like it, it's up in my mind, and somewhere deep down I am inclined to go in that direction. But to say that I actually feel for the thing, not yet. And then when I say I like it, now I might start feeling for it. So that's the second stage. So the first stage is in his mind and the hidden of his heart. And then afterwards, but then it actually comes revealed in his heart, where he actually feels that he wants the actual thing. And this is all still in the first two letters of Hashem's name, the Yud and the Hey. The Yud, the awareness, and then the Hey, as he divides it here to two levels. The expansiveness, the full understanding, and then the Oirach, the length, bringing that understanding down into a feeling. And that's all an internal experience, because I haven't expressed myself yet. It's how I think about something, how I understand Hashem, and then what I feel of Hashem. But I haven't yet expressed it into Alman, this guy, and I haven't expressed it into the revealed world, into the outside. And from all of this, Nimshecha Avodah can be drawn down a service, Hamitis, the true service. The Esak Torah, in the service of, in the involvement of Torah and mitzvahs, the Koil in speech, in sound, for dibur in speech, or maisa, or in action. Now already I've left the internal world into the external world. I'm behaving, I'm communicating, I'm talking, I'm taking all the things I understand about Hashem and all the things I feel about Hashem and putting it out there into the world. I'm going into Alman Desgali, into the revealed worlds. And Hein, they are alluded to, Oisi's Vavhe, in the latter two letters of Hashem's name, the Vav and the Hey, which again, the Vav is about bringing it down, the Vav is about taking it from the way I want it, taking the way from the way I feel about it to the way in which I want to project. That's what Vav is. It's a different part of emotions. A person can love something from today to tomorrow, and in theory never express it. But then there's a point where a person really likes something where he starts to feel like he has to say something about it. That's the Vav here, where the emotions are pushing an outward expression, and then finally the Hey is the actual expression on the outside, either in an act or in a speech, in the service of Torah mitzvahs. And then this is, as he says here, Avodah mitzvahs, the true service of Hashem. For various different reasons, this is considered the true service of Hashem, as explained in part 1 of Tanya, a number of different reasons. First of all, as he mentions, actions without love and fear don't fly up, right? Remember learning this? Actions, Torah mitzvahs as they are, like Parach Leila, they don't have the wings to be brought up to Hashem unless they have some feeling to it. That's number one. But also on a basic level, if my service of Hashem does not incorporate my understanding and my feelings, then it leaves a whole part of me out. I'm not really serving Hashem. My hands served Hashem, not me. I've left myself out of it. I'd rather be somewhere else. I feel for something else. So when am I truly serving Hashem? When everything about me is serving Hashem. And then I can fully express my own personal Yud Hey Vav Hey, and that would connect to the true essence of Hashem, which is connected to the Yud Hey Vav Hey, which is a direct link, I should say, to the Yud Hey Vav Hey of Hashem's name, is invested in me in this kind of behavior, where I'm aware of Hashem, and therefore I understand Hashem, and therefore I feel for Hashem, and therefore I behave for Hashem. And now, in the way the Rebbe explains this, the Alter Rebbe adds one more element to the understanding of Hashem's truth. And the reason why he adds this, and the way the Rebbe explains this, based on what we said before, that the Yud Hey Vav Hey, as they are, the four letters, these four stages, as they are in the human experience, is not valued unless it's expressed in the service of Hashem. Being aware of Hashem independently as a human being is limited. Unless it's invested in the service of Hashem, now you're making a real connection. You're doing Torah and mitzvahs. So now your awareness of Hashem has some value because it services your service of Hashem. It services your Torah and mitzvahs. Can you pass the tissues if you want? So here the Alter Rebbe gives another option for how the awareness of Hashem and the understanding of Hashem can be connected to the service of Hashem. Because so far the awareness of Hashem and the understanding of Hashem are somewhat disconnected from the actual service. The service of Hashem, the work of Torah mitzvahs is imbued and infused with my feelings. So when I'm acting, what's active within me is my feelings for Hashem. My understanding of Hashem is kind of left behind. My understanding of Hashem was a precursor to how I feel for Hashem. But what's active now while I'm serving Hashem? My feelings. So one might be concerned, says the Rebbe, that my learning or my understanding of Hashem is disconnected somewhat from my service of Hashem. It only led to how I feel, and how I feel is what's invested in my action. At least that's how, let's say a person's doing this whole process, where he's understanding Hashem, and then he gains a love of Hashem, and because he loves Hashem, now he puts on tefillin. So when I'm putting tefillin, what's active within me? Not my understanding of Hashem, my feelings towards Hashem. So one might be concerned that my understanding of Hashem is left behind, is left out of the service.
Is there a difference between intention and feeling in your description?
Seems so. In other words, what the Alter Rebbe does give the in part 1, where a person who has a difficulty feeling for Hashem, getting an actual emotion, how he can connect his thoughts directly to his action, right? It's a beautiful chapter. But in theory, if a person's engaging all of his Yud Hey Vav Hey, then what he's actively feeling when he's serving Hashem is a feeling, it's a love. Right? So here the Alter Rebbe gives another option in how the service of Hashem, of how the understanding and awareness of Hashem can be part of the service of Hashem. In addition, the contemplation to understand and be aware of Hashem itself, it itself comes from Torah, where Torah comes from Hashem's wisdom, which is the letter Yud of Hashem's name. So the Alter was kind of saying that the contemplation of Hashem is connected to the service of Hashem, not just via the feeling it engenders, which is then invested in the action, but the very contemplation of Hashem's truth comes from Torah, and therefore it itself is a service, and therefore it itself connected to Hashem. Okay, this ends chapter 4, and we don't need to recap all of chapter 4, but in order to go to chapter 5, but let's just say this. In chapter 5, what he's going to do is he's going to explain what Kodesh is. In the beginning of chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe asked, how is it if, in the way the Alter Rebbe and Chassidus understands it, punishment is a direct result of behavior, punishment and reward is a direct result, consequence, and not retribution, then however Kodesh happens, Kodesh is excision, where a person dies as a result of a certain type of sin, if that's a direct result of whatever you did, then how is it possible that there are people today who have done sins for which they are liable for Kodesh? And even, says the Rebbe, by the way, in this question, even if the answer cannot be simply that a person did teshuvah, that's not enough. Because if it's retribution, then I could say, okay, Hashem wants to smite you down as a result of what you did, because retribution, and now You did teshuvah, so you appeased Hashem. Hashem is going to rescind it. But if it's a direct natural result, then it's not enough to say that you made up for it. Whatever you're doing in teshuvah has to somehow counteract the natural consequence that karas should cause. Which is why the question of karas really will help us understand teshuvah. Because if the sin has a direct natural consequence, landing in karas and excision, and teshuvah can stop that, then teshuvah also has to have a natural consequence which counteracts the natural consequence that was caused by the sin. That's why karas is so central to understanding it. So, in order to fully understand karas, before we get to the answer to the question, which is going to come in chapter 6, about how today people live longer than 50, 60 years old, but first you have to understand how people died at 50 and 60 when they did die, back in the day. So to understand that, we need to understand the direct line between the neshama as it's vested in the body, the soul as it's invested in the body, and the soul as it emerges from Hashem himself, and how that direct line exists, and how a person can cut it off through a sin. This is where he's building to. He describes first the Yud Hei Vav Hei of Hashem, and then the Yud Hei Vav Hei within the human being. And now he's going to describe the connecting line, and how that connector can be cut off through a sin. Following? Okay. Now, v'hinei hamshachas v'yidus hanef perakei. Hamshachas v'yidus hanef shalakis l'lam hazem. The drawing down of the descent of the godly soul, l'lam hazeh, into this physical world, l'slabish beguf, to be invested in a body, beguf adam, in the body of man. So now he's no longer talking about the way the soul emerged from Hashem. The way the soul emerged from Hashem comes from the breath of Hashem, etc. From the inner life. Now he's talking about the way the soul then descends into the body. Nimshecha is drawn forth b'pchinas pnimis, from the internal, u'makar hadibur, and the source of the speech, hu havala elyon, is the breath, hamarubid ba'is hey tata, which is alluded to in the last hey. So let's explain this a little bit. We mentioned before, towards the beginning of chapter 4, that the metaphor for how the neshama emerges is Hashem's breath. And then we said, in order for that breath to come into a body, it needs to have words, and therefore goes into the word, Nasa Adam, let there be man. And now what's he saying? He's saying that that it comes from the breath again. So does it come from the breath, or does it come from the words, Nasa Adam, let there be man? So he's explaining it like this. Everything that exists, all creation, has to have words. It has to have words in order for it to exist. The metaphor of words. The metaphor of words being a package that gives it its character, its flavor, its dimensions. If it didn't have that, it would just be an ethereal entity that had no independency, really. It can only have that if it emerges in a word that's articulated that says, you are defined by such. That's the only way that anything can exist in our world. And therefore, even a human being with the loftiest of souls has to have a word, Nasa Adam. The question is, the life force that pumps through those words. What's the life that animates those words? What life is that? So words itself, as we said before, don't have to have a very deep level of breath. There's a very minuscule external level of breath that emerges every time I talk. So it's true that there's a divine word that's invested in this cup to keep it alive, but it's not really the words, it's the breath, so to speak, it's the life that's invested in the word that's keeping this alive. And that breath is very minuscule. But for the Jew, even though those words, Nasa Adam, let there be man, but the life that pumps through those words, let there be man, is an internal life. And the point he's making here is that breath is not just divine breath as it emerges from Hashem, but even as it descends down into the body, it remains that internal breath, even as it's packaged in the words of Nasa Adam. Following? So even as it descends, it's not as if like there's this emergence of the breath of Hashem. That's in theory could be true. The breath of Hashem emerges, and we create a soul in Atzilus. And then that soul is put into the words of let there be man, and then together they descend into this world. He says, no. Even as it descends into this world, it's a divine breath. So even as it's packaged in the words, let there be man, what the life force that pumps through that is not the kind of breath that's ordinarily invested in speech, which is very external. The breath that's invested in the speech of let there be man is an internal breath, like Hashem's blowing. Following? And where does this come from? Hu Havelarian, this is supernal breath, so to speak. Hamrumas, which is alluded to, Ois Hey, Tata, in the latter letter Hey of Hashem. Right, the second letter Hey of Hashem, we said before, is expressive of communication. And we said that Hey alludes to two things, to two parts of speech. First of all, the external part of speech is alluded to in the letter Hey, because letter Hey is 5, and all speech is divided into 5 different parts of the mouth that break up all the sounds into the various different categories of sound. Right, the lips, tongue, palate, throat, and something else. Sorry? Teeth, right? Yeah. And that's the external part, that's the actual sounds. But then we also said that letter Hey alludes to the inner part of sound, because letter Hey, all you're really doing is, you're just making a breath. That's the letter Hey. So Hey also alludes to the internal part of sound, which is just the breath, and that is where the neshama comes from. Even though we said before the neshama has all the Yud Hey Vav Hey, but the Yud Hey Vav Hey has to be expressed somewhere, right? So let's say my awareness is expressed where? In my speech. So everything, all my internal experience, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, can be expressed through the letter Hey, through my speech, my communication. So all 4 letters of Hashem's name are expressed in the Hey, in the breath that's then invested in let there be man and man himself. Knesset was mentioned before. And as the verse says, and God blew into his nostrils a breath of life, and therefore this is the verse which proves for us that divine life, that the life that's invested in man, the soul that's invested in man, comes from breath, not just speech. But here he has the second half of the verse. In chapter 4, when he said this, he only quoted the first half of the verse, which says, now he adds the second half of the verse, which says, and man became a living being. Why does he add this? He's adding this to say that even the way man is a living being in a body, it's direct link to Vayipach, to Hashem's breath, Hashem's blowing. Before he was trying to say where the soul emerges from. And now he's telling you that even when the soul's in this body, it's still connected to that place where it emerges from, which is the divine blowing. And therefore he quotes the second half of the verse. God blew into his nostrils a breath of life, and then became a living man. A living man in a body connected as in direct link to Vayipach, to Hashem's blowing. Which is, one who blows from his inside. And therefore even the soul, as it's invested in the living man in this human body, is connected directly in a direct line to Hashem's blowing. Now he quotes the other verse, which he quoted also in chapter 4, and over here again he quotes the second half of the verse, which he doesn't quote in chapter 4. And this is the meaning of the verse, which says, for his people are a part of Hashem. So he quoted this part of the verse before to say that the Jewish soul is a part of Hashem. Fine. Now he adds another part of the verse. Yaakov, how does it translate it here directly? Jacob is the cord of his inheritance. That is to say, there's the metaphor of a cord connecting us to Hashem. Why is he using the metaphor of cord? Because again, cord implies that one end is one place and one end is somewhere else. And the point being here is, even when you're all the way down at the bottom of the cord, you're in a body, you're in a human body with the nefesh Bahamas and all kinds of free choice and all kinds of mistakes, etc. You're still connected in a direct line up to the original source. And that's why I quote the second half of the verse, which describes not just that we're a part of Hashem, but that there's a cord connecting us to being part of Hashem. Again, in both instances, he quotes the second half of the verse, implying that this deep source where the Jew comes from is connected all the way down to where the Jew is in his body. Perush, meaning to say, like a cord by way of example, where one end is tied up above. The other hand is down here. So even when I'm down here, I'm still connected to the very same cord that connects me directly up to the top of the line. Essentially, the Rebbe identifies here 3 levels. When we get to the high level of Tshuva, we're going to see a 4th level. But essentially there are 4 levels / stages. The first is the breath described in chapter 4. Vayipach va'apav, where Hashem blows out, where a soul emerges from Hashem's breath. Number one. Number two is that same power of breath, that same power of Hashem's blowing, is what pushes the soul down from its lofty space into the body. Or its descent comes through that breath, comes through that blowing. And then finally, the chevel, the cord, which is the soul that's actually in the body, is all connected in one direct line. So let's put it this way. In the way in which the only metaphor for this is blowing, and that's why he uses this, is the breath. But there's a distinction between, or let me put it this way, it's not exactly a perfect example, but this is a kind of, will give you an idea. My mind emerges from me, right? That's my thoughts. My feelings emerge from me. My action emerges from me, my speech emerges from me, and then finally, if I took this and moved it here, it also happened from me. But what's the difference between how this is connected to me and the way my thoughts are connected to me? It's a huge difference. Both can emerge from me, that's true, but the difference is how, no matter how low my thoughts go, there's always a direct line between me and my thoughts. Whereas in action, where I pick up this little light and I move it from right to left, I walk away from it, the action's still there. It emerged from me, yes, but it emerges from me in a place that's disconnected from me. That's the metaphor of speech, where everything's created from speech. So it's not only that speech is an external amount of breath that's invested in the speech. That's true. But also the fact that after I finish speaking, the speech exists outside of me. It doesn't have that direct line to me. Whereas the way I think about something also goes down to a very low level, but it's always connected in direct line to me, and that's the blowing here. When Hashem is blowing His own breath, so to speak, that is to say, no matter how low it goes, even if the Jewish soul ends up in a very low place, it's still always connected in the direct line to the place from where it emerges, which is Vayipach, which is Hashem's breath. And that's the main point of this whole long explanation, which is why he's so much more elaborate here than he is in part 1, where he describes the neshama. Because over here, the main point he's trying to get to here is that no matter how low the neshama goes, it's always connected directly to Hashem. And therefore, even when he's doing a sin, he has an effect on his soul, and it has effect on the source of his soul, which is Hashem himself. But in order to really understand that, he has to really stress this point that at every stage of the soul's descent, from when it emerges from Hashem himself all the way down to the body, it's in one direct line of connected to the very essence of Hashem's truth. And God willing, today's Friday, so God willing Monday, we'll get to how Karas has an effect on that connection, or how sins have an effect on that connection.